It has been 322 days since Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. It's unthinkable cruelty, death and destruction with no end in sight for Ukrainians. Earlier, I spoke with former CIA director under the Obama administration, retired U.S. Army General David Petraeus. General Petraeus, thank you very much for joining me again, sir.
Great to be with you, Greta. Thanks.
General, we're coming up on a year since Putin invaded Ukraine. Can you give me sort of an overall assessment of where Ukraine stands and where Russia stands on this war?
Well, this has been pretty disastrous for Russia. They began by thinking that they could topple the capital, Kyiv, replace the government with a pro-Russian figure, and go home to a victory parade. And obviously that did not transpire. They completely underestimated the capacity and capabilities of the Ukrainians and, frankly, of the leadership of their president, who has been positively Churchillian, President Zelensky, and the sheer will to fight of all the Ukrainian people, but especially those who, of course, have answered the call to serve in uniform and other capacities, supporting those on the front lines. Ultimately, they lost the Battle of Kyiv. They lost the battles of Sumy and Chernihiv, two other northern cities that were quite important. They withdrew from all of northern Ukraine. Subsequently, they lost the Battle of Kharkiv. And then the Ukrainians launched a very impressive counteroffensive this past fall, where they pushed down along the border of Russia and Ukraine in the east, south of Kharkiv, and recaptured, liberated a fair amount of what Russia took at the outset in the southeast and the south, the two areas where the Russians did make significant achievements early on in the war. Subsequently, the Russians had to withdraw all their forces that were west of the Dnipro River, the river that runs from Kyiv, sort of sit down and bisects the country east and west. But in recent months, the situation has been relatively static on the front lines as the Ukrainians attempt to regenerate or generate additional forces, aided enormously by the colossal amount of U.S. arms, ammunition, and other material, over $24 billion just since 24 February, the date of the Russian invasion, and then help from lots of other Western countries, particularly those that are members of NATO. And so now I think the question is, will the U.S. and the West provide the additional capabilities that could be the further game changers for Ukraine in the way that the provision of the high mobility artillery rocket system has been, with the precision munition that it has that can hit, a dinner table sized target that accurately out to about 50 miles? Will we get the munition that provides double that range? Will we provide tanks? Now, Hardingly, and you're going to Poland, I know, and please tell them from me and others who are very supportive of Ukraine, bravo on providing tanks to Ukraine. They're going to provide Western German Leopard 2 tanks. The UK is doing the same thing with their Challenger tank, and we hope that Germany will ultimately provide Leopard 2 tanks. That comes on top of the US, France, and Germany providing infantry fighting vehicles, the US providing the Patriot anti-ballistic missile system and anti-aircraft system, which we'll have to train them in the United States to use. And then can we provide some other additional capabilities, some additional counter-drone capabilities, given how devastatingly dangerous the Iranian-provided drone swarms have been, mixed in with cruise missiles from Russia that have done so much damage to the Ukrainian electrical and water infrastructure. And then can there be some other specific capabilities, more high-end drones, the Predator in particular? So I think those are the questions that are in the offing right now. I think that most of those capabilities will be provided in addition to, again, further extraordinary quantities of particularly artillery ammunition, way over 1 million rounds so far. Because what we need to see, Greta, is in mid-March or so, when the weather gets a bit more hospitable for offensive operations, will the Ukrainians have the additional capacity and capability to carry out new counteroffensives to liberate further of their territory, especially if the Russians expend so many of their additional recruits on the current campaign that they're pursuing, where they're literally getting maybe a block or so a day at a horrendous loss. Keep in mind that the Russians have lost probably 8 times the losses they sustained in nearly 10 years of war in Afghanistan, the USSR war there, in just 10 or 11 months. So the question really is, what will it take for Putin to finally realize at some point down the road, and we're not near this point right now, that this war is unsustainable for Russia? And we need to do everything we can to hasten the day where he realizes that on both the battlefield and on the home front, where the economic, financial, and personal sanctions are beginning to bite harder now, and the export controls, we need to provide what's additional to Ukraine and tighten those sanctions so that he finally realizes that this just can't go on, and he's got to figure out a way to negotiate a withdrawal from this war.
What does Vladimir Putin think he has? You've outlined, what Ukraine has, what it wants from everything. But I mean, Putin knows all that stuff. So, what is it that Putin thinks that he has that keeps him in the war?
Well, I think he looks in the mirror right now, Greta, and he doesn't see what a lot of us see, which is a leader who's made a catastrophically bad decision for his country that is incurring enormous losses on the battlefield. Again, the estimates are 100,000 of his soldiers lost on the battlefield. Again, compared with 13,300 or so in 9-10 years of war in Afghanistan. Devastating losses, and then what it's doing on the home front to the economy, the financial system, his inner circle, his industries, and so forth. What he sees is a leader of a proud nation. He believes Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist. By rights, it should be part of Russia. And by the way, he recalls we Russians, we outsuffered Napoleon's army, we outsuffered Hitler's Nazi army, and we are going to outsuffer the Ukrainians, those weak Europeans and the weak Americans. I think he's wrong on that, but we need to prove that.
Thank you, General David Petraeus, for joining me.